thank you very much, Magnus Group, my colleagues, keynote speakers, those present, and I understand those on the internet joining us as well. I thank you all. It's a pleasure. I am going to talk about the oil and gas industry, specifically the upstream sector. I understand that we have focus on bioenergy, which is an area which we also deal with, but let's focus here and now. Let's get right into it. Oops. Where are we? Oh, there. Where are we? Oh, there. No. Just a sec. Why isn't it going? Keys, batteries or keys? There. Okay, perfect. Thanks. So we wanted to talk first about the challenges that the oil and gas industry in general is facing, the world. Certainly, the projected energy demands for the world are higher than we used to think. They're growing, and they're going to be a problem to meet. The energy demand will require a renewed emphasis on oil and gas, despite the emphasis that is ongoing, biofuels, alternative energy, and so on. And the world faces an imperative to find, develop, and produce resources. And this is now, before the end of the oil age. We need to do all of this right now. And countries also face exploration challenges, development and production of frontier exploration regions, which are very important for many countries because that's what their development depends on. The budgets for national oil companies are insufficient oftentimes to carry out a lot of these campaigns. They're not attractive enough to attract the big oil and gas players. The risks involved in large exploration campaigns are actually inhibitory because you don't even know where to start and how to start. And the oil industry, in turn, faces challenges. The need for reserves replacement. I had a lot of pictures that are not here, but we'll share an updated version. Attractive exploration plays remain unexplored. That's a reality that the world faces right now. There are a lot of world plays, attractive oil and gas plays that remain unexplored or underexplored because there just hasn't been the investment made in those regions. Uncertain oil prices, uncertainty in general, high risk, long exploration campaigns. We're talking about years before anything happens, expensive outlays, high risk plays in many cases, which would be worthwhile, but the high risk is inhibitory. So those are all very, very big challenges. And then the oil companies face challenges. The need to explore and develop new plays. The oil companies themselves have to replace resources. They have a mandate, ever more so from their shareholders, to develop and produce oil plays, produce cash flow, produce dividends, and they will come from frontier plays. There's just so much that you can do in developing brownfields. Investigating large, unexplored, promising areas is very expensive, even for the majors. You often see them do this in consortia, and even so, it's difficult. Reconciling costs and risks of exploration campaigns, very difficult. Different pressures on corporate boards make this very much more difficult. So we need solutions. That all of this is to say, we need solutions that reduce the cost of exploration. The survey, the beginning of the exploration sector, is a very expensive, long, drawn-out process, basically involving large seismic campaigns. Before you do much else, maybe you have some basic geology knowledge of the region, but you do a campaign. you need to reduce the time to execute these campaigns. It's just so expensive nowadays and takes so long to explore a new area that it has been prohibitive for even wealthy countries, big companies to carry these out. The risk itself is traditionally very high. The oil industry is known for high risks and high returns. But that means that because of high risk, you need to have some good idea that the returns are going to be commensurate. Otherwise, you just won't start. And you have to allow the need for exploration outlays to increase gradually. Because if you have to put a whole lot of investment up front before you even get to the second stage and say these are attractive exploration areas, then you have made a large outlay, which may turn out to be worthless if you don't have promising plays. So you have to develop a way that the investment is parceled out as you develop interesting plays. And this is a key point. Right now, you have to do an exploratory campaign, seismic survey, even if it's 2D in a large area. You have to complete the whole survey, do a lot of work, takes years, a lot of money, but that is before you even have an idea of whether you have attractive exploratory plays. Licensing concerns, this is a concern all over the world. I'm in Brazil. We have large exploratory areas that are right now being held up for years because of licensing problems for the exploratory phase. Certainly more so for, drilling, because then there's another whole licensing problem. So the typical oil and gas exploratory site involves many stages, complex, long. Basically, you're talking 5 to 7 years, even when things go smoothly, and many times more. Attractive basins are bigger than even the largest companies can afford to tackle by themselves. That is a reality that in the past we were able to do piecemeal things. Nowadays, the easy things are more or less done. We have a lot of areas that we know hold yet to find resources. We know the resources are there. We just don't know exactly where. The US GS, for example, conducts occasional reviews of oil and gas plays throughout the world and their potential of resources that can be produced, many, many large areas. But it's very difficult to begin that. This is, for example, the equatorial margin in North Brazil. It goes all the way up to the Guianas, and then it goes beyond into Guyana and Suriname and so on, all the way to Venezuela. Very promising area and very prolific. We know Guyana, for example, and Suriname is on the way, have already 10, 12 billion barrels of discovered resources. Suriname is on the way. Venezuela has offshore. Brazil has many blocks that have been put under concession. Some drilling has occurred, some discoveries and closer to shore, maybe older efforts, but the areas are gigantic. 360,000 square kilometers of area. To tackle that, it's no use just doing a campaign in little bits and pieces. You have to have an understanding of the region, of the frontier region. Again, this even very prolific areas, you do a campaign and it's a small piece of the whole area that you should investigate, because it's a possibility to find reproducible resources all over the basin, for example. And what use is it to do a campaign over 2%, 5% of the region? Very difficult challenge, because there just aren't resources enough to go through that. Even the most prolific regions in the world, for example, the Brazilian pre-salt trend, which is again 150,000 square kilometers, very, very large. of course, highly explored because we've now had many, many discoveries. So obviously we've done 2D surveys, 3D surveys, we've redone them. We have many areas under 4D monitoring. So this, you'd say this is a mature area. No, it's not mature. It's in the infancy of its exploratory cycle, despite the fact that there's surveys all over the place. And if you talk to the majors, Petrobras, Exxon, Chevron, BP, all the Equinor, the players involved there, they'll say, what do they need? They need more surveys to understand better, to focus better. It's not over, even when you have this kind of coverage. And this is, just the pre-salt. If you talk to Campos, Santos, the Espírito Santo Basin is gigantic areas, 350,000 square kilometers. If you do the same thing, I don't show it here, you go to West Africa, you go to East Africa, you go to Southeast Asia, you still have areas, regions of frontier exploration potential that are just too big to tackle. And then, of course, climate change, everybody's talking, oh, the Arctic will be opened up, maybe for shipping, that will happen. But it's very difficult to conceive that the Arctic will really be a producing region anytime soon, because the challenges, the barriers to exploration there are just gigantic. And the area, we're talking 15 million square kilometers. Obviously, not all of it is interesting and so on, but where do you start? And the countries, you have Russia, Canada, US, some in Europe. It's just too big to tackle. That's basically the upstream, the exploration challenge. The potential is large, it's giant, but to begin where, how, and with what resources. It's just Russia has, Sakhalin and all those places. You can say, well, it's up there, but they can go further. And Russia has got plans for that. Obviously, very difficult under current conditions and so on. But this is indicative of what we're facing. The opposite, the tip of South America into the Antarctic is also prospective, not just the Falklands and so on, the tip of South America. Again, giant areas. We know from geology and from plate tectonics, very interesting basins were formed and potential, but basically nothing has been done there. So there's no question that new technology can have dramatic effects on how exploration or how the industry itself behaves and works. I talk about Brazil because I'm intimately involved with things there. In deep offshore Brazilian basins, the effect of marginally lowering the break-even price for projects to go ahead is very important, because if you have, for example, break-evens of 28 to 35, yes, project goes ahead. If you have a break-even up to 50, the project won't go ahead. That's just a yes or a no, a go or a no-go. So if you have technologies that can take it from $50 a barrel break-even down to 35, 40, or whatever, then you open up opportunities, and many of those are well known. You know those already. You know the basins, and some of those are areas that already have producing areas. It's just a question of, does it make sense to throw additional investment dollars? No, because we can't guarantee that in our models, projections, that prices are going to be above 50. But if we have a $40 break even, maybe those fit in the model, in the pricing model that we use for decisions. Same thing in other technologies. Managed pressure drilling opened up plays in deep, high pressure in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. That's a very good example. Brazil was the country that established the FPSO model, which is nowadays almost standard. You get a significant discovery offshore, deep waters, This is it. Until 10 years ago, this was not the standard model. In Brazil, it was, but not yet in the Gulf of Mexico. At that time, 2 FPSOs in Gulf of Mexico, 40 in Brazil. And nowadays, it's basically standard. That opens up a whole different ballgame. Other technologies, certainly seismic has advanced a lot, and seismic is king. In seismic, we have progressed to the point where we do 4D seismic monitoring of reservoir drainage. We do that in the North Sea. We do that in Brazil. We do some of that in the Gulf of Mexico. This is 4D seismic, repeated, constantly monitoring reservoir drainage. And if you can identify areas that are still not drained because they're not well connected as you expected and so on, you can guide new drilling to get those areas in production. This is a fantastic way of promoting field development to basically get the last drop that you can produce within the recovery factor. And all of these technologies, at least in the exploration cycle, were focused on seismic because seismic is king. Exploration budgets of all the major companies are 98% devoted to seismic at the beginning. Then you go to development and so on, and you have different things. But 2D seismic, 3D seismic consumes 98% of that exploration budget. Yes, there's 1 or 2% and some grav, mag. And we were involved in a large project in southern Gulf of America, in Mexico, which has a slightly different model. And Pemex, the state oil company there, has a model where they do have a significantly larger budget allocation to alternative potential methods, gravity and magnetics and so on, especially grav, very high quality, that has been able to do reservoir monitoring with gravity. And they have been able to show these areas have not been drained, and they can guide drilling there. Now, Pemex is not a very good model to use because it's a company that has serious problems. On LinkedIn, I'm known as a Mexico basher. Nothing against Mexico, it's just that it has a lot of potential. Pemex was at least a company with excellent professionals, and it's been run into the ground. And it makes that potential very difficult to realize. But that's an important reality. We have to deal with the realities. Companies have political interference when they're national oil companies. So the focus was improved acquisition in seismic, better trails and so on. Low noise sources, maybe because of environmental concerns. New acquisition configurations. This has achieved tremendous quality improvements in seismic modeling of, for example, the Campos and Santos Basin. I'm from Brazil, but I can say this: we have some of the best 3D volume modeling of the basins in the world, maybe comparable to something in the North Sea, with very advanced configurations for seismic acquisition. Even though, for example, the area is already got a lot of rigs and so on, FPSOs all over it. You have to do runarounds. And even then, you can conduct seismic surveys with exceptional quality. Seismic has not stood still. It has improved a lot. And obviously, processing improved algorithms. And there's no wonder that all of the major top 10 computers in the world, many of those are in oil companies. Of course, they need heavy duty processing. I'm familiar with Petrobras, has 4 or 5 supercomputers. Some of those we have been involved with. It's not just 1, 4 or 5 in various places. And nowadays you can conduct operations there, running 24 hours a day, processing on some of these surveys that have been run some years ago, but they're still being reprocessed to extract every piece of new information available. So better processing is key. And so the industry needs something transformative. It's not just better acquisition, a little better acquisition, or a little better processing, or a little better configuration. We need a big change. We need a technology that can furnish indication of prospective areas right at the beginning, before huge investments are made in exploration, so that you know whether to proceed or not. Because if you have to make all of the investment before you know whether to proceed or not, if it's not to proceed, you just lost a whole bunch of money. If you can do it piecemeal, you lose maybe a little bit of money, because you do some exploration effort and you decide that's not a prospective area, you can stop, or you can focus it. You need prospectivity indications that if poor efforts, if exploration efforts must be terminated, they can be terminated before you spend a lot of money. If the initial results says, well, we don't see, very interesting configurations there in the subsurface, okay, stop. Don't waste a lot of money. Go somewhere else. But you have to be able to do that before you plow a lot of money into it. And then, if it's possible, a geophysical investigation method that provides upfront prospectivity information. Of course, that's the dream. The industry has been dreaming about, direct hydrocarbon indicators. We're ever closer to that with seismic in a lot of ways, not just flat spots and AVO indications and so on. We're getting close to that. But if we can have an indication like that, then it turns the industry upside down, because then you have an indication of prospectivity, and then you investigate the hell out of it. Then you go do extensive 3D. You do all of that focused. You spend a lot of money, but on a small area, so your outlays are less, your time to execute those surveys are less, and consequently, you reduce risk. So there is such a thing. It's stress field detection. It's a geophysical investigation method. It's non-seismic sensors that identify confined fluid accumulations due to the subsurface stress field anomalies that are present near and around reservoirs. It significantly reduces risk, because you're pointing to significant accumulations before you do a lot of other work. Even though the tool, for example, the method, doesn't give you what seismic does, which is a good view of the subsurface, it just gives you an indication of prospectivity, of whether there are anomalies related to stress fields around reservoirs. It doesn't tell you depths and so on. The method can be applied before you do extensive survey. Non-invasive, obviously that's important for licensing and so on. It's quick, it's airborne, and it's an important support for a decision process. It was a winner last year of best exploration technology. This is what we're trying to achieve. Everybody's familiar with seismic models where you eventually get to 3D cubes and so on that you can manipulate. You can change attributes that you're looking at to try to focus on those attributes that will highlight exactly what you're looking for, fluid areas and so on. This is a completely different survey result. This is a 2D map, of prospectivity indication. Obviously, yellow is hot, red is a little less hot. So if you have a map like this, you focus on 2 or 3 or 4 highly prospective areas. That's where, on all of this block or basin, you will focus your seismic. Do 3D. Look for what that anomaly is pointing to. Is it a deep reservoir? Is it, pinch out, whatever? Then you can do the exploration effort exactly where you understand there will be high prospectivity. And indeed, just to show examples, in the Mexico survey that I was involved with, this method was flown over offshore and onshore regions where it cut across the Yucatan also. And Pemex has extensive exploration in the past in that area. It had something like 64 identified fields, large and small, some of them under production, several under production, but they knew there were 64 accumulations and say, okay, let's fly the plane with the method over those accumulations. And indeed, the method was able to identify 47 of those. So it's not so bad. You say, well, the method is pretty good at identifying prospective high target accumulations. But of those 47 accumulations, they contained 99% of the fluid of the accumulations, because the big accumulations were definitely identified. Some of the small accumulations were not. Obviously, technology in being built, being improved. So smaller accumulations are still not its strong point. But if you have a large accumulation, it will definitely point to it. If you have large offshore areas, you're not looking for 50 or 100 million barrel accumulations. You're looking for large accumulations because they're not profitable. They're not attractive unless you have 500 million barrels there in order to start looking at it. So this is a very good example. And this is maybe some of the output as it comes out, which you use several of those lines to build those 2D maps. Again, under different conditions, including salt diapers, which in Brazil we have the pre-salt. Salt is a major barrier for a lot of the exploration efforts underway, even though we have very deep seismic and undersalt and subsalt seismic. We call it pre-salt because the layers are older than the salt. But very good seismic, but still problematic around below salt. And this method is not affected by that. So very good indications of prospectivity that have been subsequently shown to in context with a seismic section. And now you see why that anomaly was pointed out, because that's exactly where you'd expect it to be if you were looking at the 2D section. So this is where I see the future of exploration. The upstream sector has to streamline, improve a lot in order to keep the oil industry competitive, to allow it to compete, to maintain its place in the energy mix of the world, even if eventually we have more and more alternative fuels, green fuels, renewable fuels, biofuels, whatever. I'm involved, for example, I was just speaking with hydrogen and other fuels. It's important, but the oil industry has to maintain its place. Stress field detection is a method that can take us there. Looking at subsurface stress anomalies associated with filled reservoirs, with fluids under confinement. That's what causes stress field anomalies. If the reservoir is there, but it's not filled, that's not a stress field anomaly. So it's good, because if you don't have a stress field anomaly, even if you have a good reservoir and it shows up in seismic, as we've seen time and again in Mexico and many other areas where we've done these, so much so that in many cases, because seismic is king, those structures that look so good in seismic were drilled because they look very good, and that's a reservoir. But the stress field anomalies were not there, but they drilled them because everybody believes seismic, and they were dry. They were dry in 100% of the cases, because if there is no fluid-filled reservoir, there cannot be a stress field anomaly. So it detects minute gravitational perturbations caused by that stress field. And this goes back to, I'm a physicist and not everybody will be familiar, but the gravity field is formed by all forms of energy and mass. So it's not just the density variations in the subsurface that affect the gravity field that a normal gravity-based gravimeter observes with a 10-kilo mass, a ball bouncing around there. That's what it's detecting. The gravity field is affected in minute scale by heat and many other things, including stress and pressure, which is what you tend to have near reservoirs. And those are not detectable by any gravity meter because perturbations are too small. It basically, instead of a 10-kilogram ball, you're using waves. You're not using a mass because mass detects mass. You're using particles that behave like waves to detect variations in the gravity field. The same type of detection equipment that LIGO, the laser interferometer gravitational observatory in the US detected the first black hole collisions that affected the space. So the gravity waves came and they detected that minute change in the gravitational field that caused very small perturbations. Just to give you an idea of how we're changing the scale from conventional potential methods to this, the LIGO observatory detected the gravitational wave because over a 2.5 kilometer laser detector, two arms perpendicular, it detected a change in the gravitational distance equivalent to less than the width of a proton, over 2.5 kilometers. This is the kind of detection sensitivity that quantum mechanics brings to the field. We're just not used to that. We can't comprehend a diameter of a proton over 2.5 kilometers. And if we go now to LISA, which is the laser interferometer space observatory, I forgot what the A was. That's 2.5 million kilometers away, 2 satellites. And they're measuring the same thing. They're measuring gravity waves from black holes colliding billions of years away. And again, the changes in distance that they're detecting are equivalent to that, basically a proton width. This is unimaginable. We're just not used to it. So I see the future of exploration surveys, campaigns with SFD, with stress field detection. They respond to the strategic needs of the industry, conducted first, less expensively, fast, point out anomalies that are interested, point up upfront prospectivity, and then you focus subsequent exploration efforts. And the exploration campaigns will be focused on those areas. You're reducing the effort from a giant basin of 150,000 kilometers to maybe just 15 or 20,000 kilometers. That's a significant 90% reduction, for example. Then things get speeded up, faster, cheaper, and because you're focusing on anomalies, it's cheaper, less risk. That's what I wanted to present. Obviously, we have a lot going on. We're talking about biofuels and everything else, changes in technology in all fields. I just wanted to bring in the upstream and exploration. And maybe we can talk about these eventually. Thanks, folks.